by any of the other Arabs of the North African states. And yes, their relation to Europe there is deep, and there's a deeper identification with European ideals, European philosophy, than perhaps with the other nations. So again, there's that very different cultural identity, I think, that's there between Tunisia and Egypt.
Thank you, Edith. Andrea, there are differences, is for sure, but I mean, I'd have to take issue with that as well, because you're talking about the pluralism of Egypt under the British influence, and frankly, I mean, Egypt, like Tunisia, is a classic post-colonial society, in which the pluralism itself, the European elites, the Italians, the Greeks, as well as were more than the British and the French in Egypt, they were part and parcel of a system, whether they liked it or not, in which there was increasingly twin tracks of justice, where European elites would be isolated from it. So I think that going for the more general point, I think that it's really, we really need to be careful when we talk about the popularity of nationalism, or the socialist nature of what went on in post-colonial places in the societies. Because, again, if we take Egypt, what happened there, the so-called socialist, Arab socialism, which was very much a kind of label that meant everything and nothing, could be identified in measures like, for example, the land redistribution reforms of the 54, which were the most wide-ranging in the Middle East and that brought a lot of popularity to Nasser. But there's a very big difference between the popularity that you get from land reform and saying that this is something to do with socialism. So I think thinking about, and with nationalism as well, I mean, you look at the role of 1956, that had a hell of an important role in terms of Egyptian identity, but also in terms of, if you look at the way that Nasser's rhetoric changes in 56, after 56, he becomes much more Arabist. Before that, he's much more concerned with Egypt first, which is a classic concentration of conventional Egyptian nationalism. So I think we use these labels of nationalism and socialism, and we're investing them with meanings that are not really there. We're talking about governments that at certain points are popular because they undertake certain kinds of measures, and they undertake those kinds of measures because in a classic post-colonial predicament, the July Revolution of 52, that's not a revolution, it's a coup. It's a coup by people that have absolutely no traction in society. Therefore, they need some kind of measure to make themselves more or less popular. So what did Nasser do? He hitches onto the Brotherhood and then, did what he did to them, and which was the cause of their radicalization. He wrote his tracts in prison, and he undertakes land reforms that make him popular. It measures public rhetoric, commitment to Arabism. The union with Syria, for example, in 58 to 61, he really was not keen on that. So, but all these things have to do with that kind of fragility, which is the hallmark of an imperial strategy of rule, which divides. Dividing the rule. Okay. So then that causes certain kinds of fragilities, which makes it so that you have to, in order to have popularity, if you're in a position of someone like Nasser, have to undertake certain measures. To invest categories like nation and socialism with any kind of causal significance, without at the very least tempering with the qualifications along with the kinds of lines that we're talking about now, I think is problematic. So I'd urge a degree of caution.
It's a wonderful point. And I would also say, of course, with regards to pluralism, if you could just maybe defend a little bit the point about pluralism, I think the question, of course, is also whose pluralism? One thing is to ask whether, for instance, Egypt before Nasser was a plural society as a whole, or whether certain sections of society, particularly of elite society, were pluralist, which of course then also would invite questions today about the role of regime insiders and maybe also their perception of what's happening popularly. But I think these are probably all questions for another day. And if I could just ask one final question, which is basically related to how journalists gather their intelligence, or have gathered their intelligence in the region, both before and now. So it would just be great if you could just elaborate a little bit about where would we even find in which countries would we even find a considerable number of Western correspondents or even stringers, and what kind of intelligence is available to you as a journalist, and do you see there any connection between the sort of like inability maybe of both scholars and journalists to have grasped that something was important?
That is a very good question. Where do we get our information from? When I work for the for Deutsche Welle in Bonn, I normally, we ask other people who work for the Arabic program in Bonn. We ask our correspondents, but they only sit in Cairo, Tel Aviv, Amman, and some other place. No, those three. So with view to the Gulf region, for example, there is very little coverage at all. Since I'm working for electronic media, that's even worse, because you should be everywhere and people are nowhere, basically. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go to the Gulf region, because the coverage from there is, sometimes journalists just go there, they shoot a film, they do some radio reports and then go out again, but no one really spends considerable time in the countries itself, at least very few people. It's a different matter for the press. The press is in that respect much better. Often they have correspondents who are there for years. I myself tried in Oman to work as a journalist. It's a very slow process, because you don't really have any, for example, you don't really have a department for political sciences, for example, at any university in Oman. So, that adds to the problem. So you can't really, it's not obvious where you find experts. So basically, the only thing you can do is to talk to as many people as possible and try to find basically opposing opinions, which is not particularly easy when you're a woman and when you're a foreigner, because for example, Omanis, no matter how frustrated they are for whatever reason, they would never talk to me just like that about their country. They would always say it's perfect, because you just wouldn't reveal that anything in your country is not good. And that's just a tradition. That's got nothing to do with trust or anything. So after a while, you have to get to know people in order to make them realize that you're actually interested, and once you get some information, eventually you find someone who's willing to talk to you officially, basically. So, and that takes time, and that is definitely something journalists normally don't have. So it's kind of that's why I love being there at the moment, and at the same time that's what makes journalism there extremely difficult, because if I only relied on the money I get from my reports there, I'd be very badly off. At the moment I get some additional funding, but otherwise it's just in journalism you probably can't afford.
Unfortunately, we've got to draw to a close, because I will speak at 4 o'clock as part of the Centre's Secondary School Outreach Program at St. Margaret's School. But please join me once more in thanking Anna for a wonderful illumination.